Hey, this is Jack, and this video is Does Dating Suck for the Average Guy? So this is coming out of the Men Going Their Own Way movement. This is one of their main complaints, is that for the average guy, dating sucks. That most women are looking for guys that are over 6 foot, guys that make 6 figures. And if you don't fit those things, you're automatically kind of excluded from most of the action. And therefore, it's actually the level of investment that's required isn't actually worth it, right? So if you've got to make thousands of swipes to get someone on a date, that's just actually illogical. Doesn't make sense for the average guy to do that. So I want to riff on this a little bit. I'm not saying that I'm right. I'm not saying I'm in the right perspectives. I just wanted to unpack this. I feel sad if that's true, right? Now, if it is true, I'll be sober, happy to be with the truth. My suspicion is that there are a lot more experiences and sort of pathways that are happening in this space, right? That in a sense, there's more complexity than one simple narrative. And my suspicion also is that there is enough partial truth in the narrative that dating sucks for the average man that it is attracting a lot of men to it because it reflects something that's true to them in their experience. So let's start with that, right? When we go in this stuff, we always want to start with what's people's experiences. So I just want to say something anecdotally right off the bat. If you've ever had the experience of dating in different dating markets, right? So if you're a user of a dating app and you turn it on in a different part of the world or a different part of the country, you might find that you have quite different experiences. I can certainly see back in the day of having different experiences of turning on a dating app in, say, San Diego and really getting crickets, not that much interest. And also sort of the sense that what I was looking at really looked a bit more like, if I was just saying it simplistically, like bikini modeling. That seemed to be the kind of avatar. And, I'm not really a beach dude or a surfer dude. Or then turning on a dating app in perhaps a more metropolitan, larger city, like a London or a New York, and just finding there's a lot of different, a much higher level of inbound interest. And same profile, not even doing anything. This is the inbound interest where you're not actually doing anything, right? Just noticing if people are swiping on you. So I do want to say to you, if you're having a difficult time in your dating market, one of the things you may want to experiment with is, are there other dating markets that are actually a better fit for you? Now, you might say, well, I live in a rural part of the world, so that's an impossibility. But you could normally pay on lots of these things to have Passport or a similar thing that allows you to turn your app on in a different city. So you could just run that experiment. I'd say it's probably worth running. For the price of actually going out on a date, you could run a lot of experiments in other cities and just see, is there interest, or give yourself permission to travel. So let's get back to this central question. I think one of the things that may have been happening is that there's a lot of stuff that was going on somewhat always already or unconsciously that now is becoming conscious, like we are becoming more socially conscious of it. So is it true that women may have always been drawn to men that make more money? Yeah, that is true. Is it true that women may be drawn to men that are taller? Yeah, that's true. So now the difference is that you get to filter for that stuff. Now, I want to say this. There's plenty of women who, and they'll say this explicitly on their profile, they're like, I could care less how tall you are, right? So, and there's other women that are explicit, like, yeah, please be at least X. And normally X is somewhere but at their height plus maybe, 1, 2, or 3 inches, right? So it's not like you have to be 6 foot plus. It's, I'm 5'6", and I'd rather date a guy who's 5'8", 5'9", or more, right? And a lot of guys also prefer that themselves, right? So this isn't just a bias that runs only in one direction, right? Now you might say, well, that's not fair if I'm a shorter guy, and yeah, I get it. At some level, it's not. It also might just be your preference, right? So I could say it's not really fair that you don't want to date a woman that's taller than you, and there are some guys who could care less also, right? So there are multiple narratives in the space, but maybe there's something that has always been somewhat true that now we're bringing it more obviously to the surface, and so we think it's maybe gotten worse, but actually I think we've gotten more conscious, right? So it's sort of like the thing that's in the background has now come to the foreground, and so we're being in connection to it in a more meaningful way, right? I also think there's a levels of sort of development thing happening here. So just stick with me with this, all right? So in a traditional context of dating and relating, I mean, in a super historical traditional context, women relied on men for resources, right? Because they were excluded from many educational paths and many career paths. Obviously, we've made huge progress in that over the last 50 to 70 years. Obviously, there's more to go. Now, actually, there are some situations where, more women are graduating medical school than men. Educational outcomes favor girls in the developed world often over boys, right? So we've got these effects that are now perhaps we need to look at in the other direction. But we've made some progress, and that has shifted the game. So in a more traditional context, yeah, it might be that the guy is expected to provide and protect, and the woman is expected to be more of a nurturer, let's say, right? In a more postmodern context, most of that, to some extent, has been relaxed, meaning the script is not as strong as it was. You may still find women who prefer that a guy makes decent money, but a lot of them don't need a guy to provide for them, and they don't actually want that. That's not the main thing for them. What they're looking for is a travel buddy, an adventure partner, someone that they can grow with, someone that they can be emotionally connected to, someone that can be a consistent force in their life of support, fun, connection, growth. And that's not to do with how much money you make. Now, it could be how much money you make is in some ways a barrier to entry, right? Because if we want to have a lifestyle where we're going to go traveling and have a lot of adventure, that's going to cost some money. But it might not be that the woman's actually expecting you to fund that. It's just she wants you to be able to participate in that. So you could look at that and say, well, yeah, that's exclusionary because you've got to be a guy that makes a ton of money, right? You could also look at that and say it's a call to resourcefulness. There's plenty of people that travel the world not on six-figure incomes, and they hack it and they figure out how to do it. You also could say it's a function of having work that is location independent, right? So that's another thing that you possibly can hack. More and more people are doing that. In some ways, the question is that woman making more or less of a demand about income? Now, I would say she's making less of a demand because it's not perhaps explicit in the context of my survival economically depends upon you as a guy. I'm going to have a higher threshold probably for how secure your income is than if, look, I can take care of myself financially and I still want you to pay for dates. That's a very different type of economic dependency, right? That's not I'm relying on you to pay the bills, to keep a roof over our heads, to figure out how to rent a home or buy a home or any of that. It's actually, I kind of want you to be able to fund our lifestyle, but I can actually fund it myself. I just maybe have some preferences that you can pay for things, right? Or I don't want to have to travel and book it all myself or plan it all myself. And there's a lot of women actually who are willing to meet a good halfway there, right? Where it's like, yeah, I'll pay my half, you pay your half. It's not like I need you to pay for every hotel, right? So I'm getting down this travel thing, right? And this is just one particular thing, but I do see it a lot on dating apps that people are traveling more. Obviously, we're kind of hopefully in the post-COVID times, and it's something that a lot of women, particularly if they don't have a family, that's one of the things that they really want to be able to do. So I don't know quite how to explain this. I want to give you a metaphor. Back in the day, countries were ruled by kings. And you can say, well, the UK still has a king, but he's not calling the shots, right? He's not the source of political power. There are some countries in the world that still have kings, right? But generally, we could say that, and there's some ups and downs and regressions, but we could say there's broadly been a movement towards more democratic and participatory forms of government, right? So now people have expectations that they just didn't have about their ability to be involved in the political process, right? If you've got a true autocrat, a king, even a queen, you're not involved. It doesn't matter what you care. We don't need to win hearts and minds because we're going to do what we're going to do, right? We do what we do because we need to do it. You don't need to know. You're not involved. It's going to impact you, but you're not involved. But when we develop a more democratic sensibility, we want to be involved, okay? So now there's a whole set of things that people are likely to complain about that they never would have complained about back in the day because they just had no expectation of even caring about that stuff because it didn't involve them. It wasn't your business, right? You think like all the the gossip about the royal family. Okay, people have a view now, but for most of history, that just wouldn't have really concerned you because you weren't going to be involved in the royal court. And you certainly weren't going to be reading about it on Instagram, So why am I saying this? I'm saying this because there are now things that might happen in the dating world that back in the day, they just wouldn't have even concerned you. If you were, quote, and we need to unpack this more, by the way, but if you were, quote, an average guy, you weren't going to be dating highly educated women from wealthy families because you weren't going to be meeting them because You weren't educated in the way that they were. You weren't socializing in the places they were. You weren't going on vacation in the places there were. Your daddy would not have known their daddy, right? And as crude as that sounds, that's how the world's worked for a long time. And obviously in some ways and in certain contexts, it still does. So the point being, when you go on a dating app now, you can meet people, just as in social media generally, from a range of backgrounds that you never would have. So you might be looking at Instagram, let's just take it outside of dating, and saying, wow, like how do these people seem to have all this time to go on these, amazing like hiking and skiing holidays in Switzerland? Well, that has, it might have opened up somewhat, but that was always happening. It's just you weren't seeing those people's pictures because you weren't in the same social clubs as them. Do you see what I mean? So there's a democratization that's happening, even whilst at the same time, there are these concentration effects. So the concentration effect might be, if every woman is filtering for a guy over 6 foot, there's a small number of guys that are over 6 foot, right? I don't know what the exact percentage is, but let's say 5% of guys, right? And then maybe over like 6'2" or 3, it's like 1% of guys. And then if she's also filtering for like making 6 figures, okay, now we're down to like, perhaps 1% or fewer, or maybe 0.5% of guys, right? So a lot of women might be oriented towards those guys. But the fact that you're even caring about that and participating, in some ways, that's your privilege, even if it feels like a pain. And I don't know if that makes any sense to you. It's sort of like if you've lost some money in crypto, right, that's going to hurt. And sorry, maybe you've made money in crypto, right? But the fact that you even got to participate, that's the thing that we're celebrating. Because back in the day, this would have only been a rich person's realm. You wouldn't have gotten involved. So we could say that crypto is democratizing finance, even whilst the access is still not completely equal, and the people who are most likely to make some of the biggest gains have a different access than you do. So it's like both of these things. But if we only focus over here and say, the concentration effect is happening and it's not fair to me, and so there's a very narrow set of guys that women are interested in, that's always probably been true. And the closer you are to a more traditional culture, the more true that is. When I traveled in Kenya, I met guys that had multiple wives, and those wives knew that they were part of a multiple wives kind of setup. And the basic deal seemed to be, if you had a sort of primary wife, and as long as you kept her happy, which seemed to be mostly a financial thing, right? So as long as she was well kept financially, then mostly it seemed like you got to do what you wanted to do with these other wives and connections, right? Now, to my Western kind of, I don't know, democratic, mostly monogamish kind of sensibilities, that didn't seem really fair. It's like, okay, so wife number 4, she just has to kind of deal with the crumbs after you've like tended to these other 3, and actually wife number 1 is okay with that. And now I'm not saying this is what's happening, all the time, and like this is a specific instance, but it seemed in the way that it was communicated to me, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that it was not an uncommon setup. Now, that setup is not as common in the Western world. And part of that is that most people have an expectation that they are going to have, even though we've got this, postmodern, ethically non-monogamous, and polyamory and solaramory, and we're sort of experimenting in this space. But the most people, I think, on the whole, have an expectation that they want a partner, and they want their partner to be exclusive to them. And so that is now that's the sort of baseline of expectation in the dating world. So if you're making a comparison, right? So if you're an average guy in the Kenyan culture, how are you going to compete with a wealthy guy who has wealth to have multiple wives, right? And you might not even have enough to support one person, So you might be getting filtered out on some apps, but if we're making a comparison between a kind of more traditional culture, where it's more likely that one guy is actually commanding the love and attention, loyalty of a number of women, to a more postmodern culture where if there is, let's even say if it's polyamory, that's actually not about being able to command multiple people's attention. It's that it's multiple people relating with multiple people. And I don't get too sidetracked on that, but it's like, you've got to see that the game is changing, but it's more complex than just one narrative. If you only focus on the concentration side, you're losing out. But if you don't see that actually there are greater expectations in this world than there were previously, you're sort of missing maybe some of the opportunities. Now, what does it even mean to be an average guy, right? This clearly to me is an essentially contested concept, which means there is no one definition that we can agree on, right? But it seems to come down to, let's just take it to sort of a minimum amount. Now, by the way, this is not me saying this. This is not me looking at guys and saying, yo, dude, you're an average guy. Like you make low five figures and you're only average height, right? I could care less, really, other than I care for people's experiences, meaning if you're a guy who's, on a low income and you're struggling, like, you have my compassion, right? And I'm willing to try and put some work in to figure out how we can create a society where economic opportunities are more broadly spread. So I'm interested in it as like, from a sort of social justice perspective, but there's not like a judgment on what does it mean to be an average guy or not. So there's not even an expression I use, but it gets used, and that's why I'm using it. So if we just take it as those two things, and now let's say you're hearing the narrative that it's hard to date for average guys, and you're having that experience, yeah, it might be that the cost-benefit analysis doesn't work for you. And I'm sober enough to get this, right? I think sometimes it's, as much as I'm interested in politics, sometimes the sober analysis it doesn't make sense to vote, right? Because I'm just in an area where everyone else on the majority is voting a different way. So my one vote doesn't really go anywhere. If you've got to swipe 6,000 times to get one date, and by the way, I've been on enough dates to know the vast, vast, vast majority of dates don't go anywhere. Maybe a second date, maybe a third date, but they're not going places. So even just getting one date, that's crumbs, really, frankly, in the whole scheme of things. I would say to you this, again, just like I've said, you could change your dating market. You could also change which apps you're using, because I found between different apps, you can get vastly different results. And I don't even know all the whys and wherefores of that. I just know it from practical experience. So there's this whole thing, right? What's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing, expecting different results. If you've been on a certain app and over time, you can just say, look, investment in versus what I get out, and, be willing to put effort in, right? Anything takes sometimes more effort than the immediate things that you get out. And dating is a weird game, right? Because mostly if you're looking for like a long-term relationship, the pattern is going to be something like 0.00000000000000000000000000001. 0.000. You know what I mean? So it's like the vast majority of things, it's like striking for oil. Most of it is just nothing. And then occasionally you strike and maybe there's something there, or you strike and actually you thought it was something and it's not really. So you got to go and hang in there. But if you've had this experience, you've done loads and loads of swipes and nothing's really happening for you, then you've got to change your approach, right? So your changing approach might be get into a different dating market. It might be get on a different dating app. It might be change something about your profile, right? Because even if you're, quote, an average guy, meaning in this instance, maybe you make median income or lower, right? Or your average height or lower, just to use the metrics that these guys seem to talk to you most. That doesn't mean you can't have an exceptional profile, because there are things about you that are going to be unique, right? So it doesn't make sense for you to maybe play to these two core things that actually, you're kind of median or lower on. Why don't you play to something else? Maybe you're smarter than the average guy. Maybe you've got more travel experience than the average guy. Maybe you have a particular passion and you're more passionate about it than the, quote, average guy, right? Maybe you have a really good relationship with your parents, and a lot of average guys don't. Maybe you're the life and soul of the party and you need to find a way to communicate that, right? Maybe you got a freaking cool motorbike and you're willing to give people rides on the back of it, right? Maybe you're brilliant at chess. Maybe you speak more than one language. Maybe you take care of your elderly aunt and you've got a heart of gold. Maybe you're great with kids. Maybe you can cook, right? Have you checked out the number of profiles of women say something just like, please cook for me? Like, there's a lot of single women that even if they are able to cook, they're not doing a great job of cooking for themselves, because for most people, cooking also involves wanting to include other people. So if you're a guy that can come along and cook, or you see these women that say, look, I'll clean, I'm great at cleaning, super hygiene, super OCD about the cleaning, but I'm not going to be cooking, so I need a guy that can cook, right? Maybe you are that guy. Maybe you're not, and you're a guy that's willing to just put in a few hours on the weekend, jump on YouTube, learn how to do 5 great dishes that you can knock out, and that already puts you above a lot of guys. Do you see what I mean? So part of this is also about your objectivity about yourself. Yeah, I can pick any dimension. You can pick any guy, right? Whether this is Russell Brand, King Charles, Jordan Peterson, Jake Paul, Andrew Tate, Conor McGregor, Cristiano Ronaldo, Piers Morgan, pick any super famous guy, and I can find a dimension on which that guy cannot compete, right? If you're Piers Morgan, you're not rocking a six-pack. And if you're Piers Morgan, you're alienating a lot of women because they don't like the disharmony and disagreeableness and some of the views that they think you have that maybe are bigoted, right? If you are, Andrew Tate, same thing goes, right? If you're Conor McGregor, a lot of what comes out of your life is what comes out of your mouth is just showbiz, right? It's not real truth. It's not deep. It's not philosophical. Seneca wouldn't be missing the fact that he's not alive today to come and hear you talk about those things, right? So part of the reason I'm saying all this is because I'm inviting you, if you're one of these guys, to open up your perspective of what matters and to be more internally oriented in that. If you're only externally oriented and you simplify, you say, well, society values these three things, and I'm actually nowhere close to the top of the pile on those things. That's a more traditional view, right? The traditional view of schooling was we're all going to do math and we're going to rank ourselves 1 to 20. And if you're number 20, you're the worst in the class at math. Okay. But the more modern and postmodern approach to schooling is, what are the strengths of the child? This child may never be good at math, but they may be genius in selling, or they may be genius in creating origami, or they may be genius in empathy and listening. And so part of this is actually learning to value who you are and to actually take your stand against a simplification and objective set of metrics, and really believing that that's the most important thing about life, really believing that the most important thing about life is how tall you are, right? If you go around and that's your core self-belief about life, that's probably not going to encourage you to develop the unique inherent strengths and talents and gifts that you have been given in this life. If life had needed you to be a giraffe, it would have manifested you that way. But life maybe needs or wants you to be something else. And this isn't just a sympathy vote to say, oh, well, I can't play this, I can't play that, therefore I'll just find some other thing that, that I don't really need to compete on. It's actually, postmodernism is offering us an opportunity, and it says, you are unique, I am unique. And the more that we play to that uniqueness, the more we actually bring our gift and contribution into the world. Some people will make more money, some people will be less, but there's a uniqueness in your contribution, and that matters. And if you can find that thing, identify it, develop it, and know how to communicate and market it to other people, you're going to have a different experience of dating. That's my central claim to you, and I want you to go out and test that. And if you don't know what that thing is, get curious, get feedback from people, get feedback from the people around you. Now, here's the other thing that might be tricky. You might not be in an environment where the people that you know value uniqueness. You might be in a very traditional environment that says you've got your place in the world, right? That is the scourge of traditionalism. You have your place in the world. This guy has a different place in the world. Why? Because he was born to a different father or family. Why? Because he was born over 6 foot. Why? Because he's got inherited money. You can have a ton of money. And by the way, I've played in some of these places, not because I have a ton of money or inherited money, but I've been in lifestyle places, right? So if you've lived in lifestyle places, there's always a bunch of trust funders. Typically, women don't like to date trust funders. They like to play with them, right? They're happy. The guy says, yeah, I'll take you on a ski weekend. But when it comes to actually bedding down into a relationship, most women want a guy that didn't just inherit his money. They want a guy that's got some initiative and a plan and a direction and, has had to kind of like develop himself. That's attractive to a lot of women, right? Because they also... they also know that just sitting on a ton of inherited money tends to corrupt your initiative, right? Unless you're doing something with it. So I could look at that situation and say, oh, it's actually to your advantage that you didn't have a bunch of inherited money, because you've had to go out and actually bootstrap yourself and make yourself and be something, and not just get it handed to you from mom and dad or whoever has the money, right? So you might actually be at a starting line that a lot of guys aren't, even though on paper, yeah, okay, he can splash the cash. But if you're looking for a real woman that wants a real relationship, there's got to be more than that. So this is another thing, right? You could look at the superficial end of the market. The superficial end of the market, because they often, here's the thing, look at themselves superficially, right? So there's no free lunch here. So if I'm going to date men superficially, transactionally, gold digging, it's often because I have a lowly view of myself, in a way, of my true self, right? I might be beautiful. I might have had amazing plastic surgery. I might look great in my bikini. I might be super sexy. I might even have made a bunch of money myself. I might have a lot going for me in an objective, kind of external looking in way. But you know this, right? We don't talk about this enough. Most hyper successful people have a difficult psychology, right? Meaning to be super, super successful and kind of that level of ambitious and driven, often it doesn't come from a high sense of real self-worth. It often comes from deficit, right? Pain, wounding, trauma. We don't talk about that enough. We love all the success, but we don't want to hear all the trauma that sits behind it. So, why am I saying this to you? I'm saying this to you because, a lot of women, and they exist. Clearly, there are women who date superficially, right? Clearly, there are, let's say, supermodels, right? Who are going for guys that are 3 times their age, who have made a boatload of money, and they're doing it because they want access to the resources. And maybe it's true love in a way that's hard to see, but maybe it's actually not. Clearly, that exists in the world. But why would you want to focus on that? A, you don't have access to that game, right? Because you're not that guy. And B, it's not really about your true self. So your opportunity is actually to go beyond the superficial, right? Your opportunity is to find the woman who says, yeah, I want you to be able to hold down a job and be reliable, but I'd much rather have a guy who is a consistent presence in my life, that wants to support me, that cares, that is kind, that knows how to deal with the world, that can handle some problems. I don't care if you make 6 or 7 figures. I care that you can hold down a job. I care that you have something that you care about in your life. These women exist. It's actually more than I think you realize. So yeah, in life, you can find any game to play, and then we can, sort of get into that silo and then imagine and overgeneralize, right? Well, all women think like this, right? All women want this. Why don't you focus on the subset of women that are more genuine and that might want things that align better with what you get to offer? And it might be that you've got to develop yourself in certain ways to make more of those opportunities for yourself. You've maybe got to develop more of your uniqueness, or you've maybe got to cultivate new community and friendship, or maybe you've got to grow a bit. And maybe part of your growing is actually busting out of some of these self-limiting beliefs to do the thing that you can do rather than the 7 things that you can't do, because that's also attractive to women, right? A woman doesn't necessarily want a guy who's just focusing all the time in negative self-comparison on guys who are wealthier, taller, make more money, etc. Maybe they want a guy that can focus on, well, here's the thing that I can do. In this world, I can become really good at this particular skill, and I can start climbing that ladder, right? Or actually, my job is a little mundane and there aren't opportunities to progress, so I can have a side hustle. And there's so many opportunities for side hustles. And maybe I only make $200 or $500 a month on the side right now, but that side hustle's growing. Give it a year or two. Maybe that's going to be, I'm making $1,000 to $2,000 as my side hustle. That's going to be attractive to a whole bunch of women. And I'm not saying do it because it's attractive to women. I'm saying do it for yourself, but notice that actually the less superficial the woman, the more she might have an opportunity to focus on other things about her own realness and about your realness at the same time. So it's an opportunity to get outside of your bubble. So in some ways, it might be that the narrative, even though it's talking to something that's true in your experience, and I get that it would be hard to be going out and trying really hard and dating and getting nowhere, getting crickets, getting rejected. And then you see the women, you think, well, who are they going for? They're going for the jocks. They're going for the wealthy guys. So why do I even want to play in this, right? Now you can turn that. So that's a form of powerlessness, right? Like I want a thing and I never get it, right? And what does powerlessness tend to turn into? It tends to turn into hatred, even if it's subtle, right? Sarcasm, snideness, resentment, but it's sort of a form of like, I call it hatred because there's like anger, which is hot, and then there's anger, which is kind of cold and internal. That's what I'm calling hatred. So we've got to be mindful of that. But you can transmute it. You can take that same thing, and rather than being down on women, you can focus on other women, even if it's a small subset of women. You can focus on getting out of your bubble, getting out of your community. You can focus on developing new skills, developing a side hustle. You can focus on getting feedback from women. Now, sometimes people push back on me and they say, oh, bro, it's so desperate. You get feedback from women. Bro, that sounds creepy. It's real. if you've dated 10 women, right? Maybe you're like, wow, that would be great to even go on a date with 10 women. You've dated 3 women. Ask them if they don't want to date you more. Ask them, can I understand why? Because you might be thinking, well, the reason she doesn't want to date me is I only make $50,000 a year and I don't make $100,000 a year. I don't think in most instances that's going to be the real reason. If it is, at least you know, right? So you're in the truth. Now, is it possible that a woman won't tell you the real reason? It's possible. But you're also, you have intuition, you have your senses. You could notice, and you can say, look, I'm a big boy. I just want to know the truth. And okay, maybe that might sound desperate to someone, but that person is probably a self-critical person. That's a judgmental view. It's actually about improving, right? If I'm trying to sell you, like, okay, this is a really successful product, the AirPods, but let's say this is my product and it's not selling. I can go to the people who haven't bought this and I can say, could you just tell me? I'm curious, like, why didn't you buy it? Or how could I make this better? Or were there any circumstances under which you might buy this? Was there anything you did or didn't like about it specifically? That's how you improve your product as an entrepreneur. And in this context, your product is your dating. And if your dating isn't working for you, you're going to seek some feedback from the market. And the other reason I'm inviting you to do this is because if you're getting your feedback from a bunch of guys who have this particular view that the world is down on average guys, even though I have some sympathy to what might be true about that, it's at best a partial truth, meaning there are other truths that coexist alongside it. Now, you have to up-level your capacity and development to be with multiple perspectives at the same time. It's seductive to be in one narrative because it gives you security, and then you don't have to go out and risk and seek rejection. You don't have to go out into the complexity of the grayness and the messiness of the world. But I'm inviting you to dig deeper and find out more about that grayness and not just take the seductive of an either or black and white worldview. It's not your highest level of development, or it's at best offering you a leg up to your next development, which is going to be being more in the both and, being more in the nuance, and being more in the multiple perspectives. And this isn't just Jack saying this. Talk to any developmental psychologist, look at the developmental literature, and maybe you're not going to do that. But as human beings develop, one of the things they develop is their ability to be with more complexity. The world is more complex, right? The world is more complex. Think of all the different narratives that exist out there, even in the culture wars. The world is more complex. But your opportunity in that is not to try and just reduce it to simplification. We're not going backwards. We're going forwards. Forwards is actually your ability to be with more perspectives. So it could both be true that average, quote, average guys are having a hard time dating. It could also be true that average guys who focus on their exceptionalism and their uniqueness are having an easier time dating because they're not trying to compete in a domain that's hard for them to compete in, right? So if you make 5 figures, it's hard to compete with the guy that makes 6 figures, let's say. But actually, you might have some things that the guy that makes 6 figures doesn't have. You might have a level of heart or care, or you might have an ability to stand up for your family, or you might have an ability to do stuff. You might knock him out of the park. It's DIY. I know plenty of guys that make 6 figures. They're not going to be knocking up a closet. That's not their thing, right? That's just how it is. So do you see what I'm saying? You can take the same data and turn it into powerlessness and frustration, or you can transmute that frustration and say, what can I do that's for the better of me and my community? And maybe it's not just checking out or kind of leaving the thing, or just having a simplified transactional view of myself and women and the dating game. Maybe I can get curious, even if it's just 1 in 100. So where is this, quote, average guy that has a great family life and a wife or a partner that he cares about, and how did he do that, right? Because the success stories and the clues are often not just in this sort of amorphous mob of the median and the average. Let's take someone. It's like, Tim Ferriss used to do this, it still does, but in a great way. Let's find the person who works out 20 minutes a week but has this like outstanding impact on their body, and let's find out, is it genetics? Could be. But is it possible that it's actually that they're doing something a little bit different? And let me find out about that. Let me find out the, quote, average guy that has made it in the dating world. What's his narrative? What's his perspective? What are his mindsets? That might be more empowering. That might actually get you closer to where it is that you want to go. Because I actually think most men who are attracted to women don't want to get into a place where they're still having all that level of attraction, but they're kind of reducing it to the transactionality of It's just about, sex. I won't be involved in relationships. Because here's the other thing. Traditionally, in a more traditional culture, men get more connection and support from other men. That's my observation. I haven't lived a huge amount of time in traditional cultures, but when like this, I've traveled in Asia, I noticed like, wow, the women hang out a lot and the men hang out a lot. Now that doesn't happen in quite the same way in the West, right? Maybe there's a men's club that you're part of, or a women's book group, or maybe you lift with a bunch of men, or you ride with a bunch of men. But most of these spaces are co-gendered. And so something different is going on. So men are actually, I think, often feeling unsupported because they don't have the support of their brothers, but they also don't have the support of a relationship. And so it's kind of like, yeah, even if you haven't wanted to go your own way, quote, in some ways you already have, right? Because you're just like, well, I don't get my men and I don't get a woman. And now I have this view of relating with women that's a little bit more transactional, right? So maybe I do, occasionally pick women up, or I have sex with women, but it's really not that meaningful to me. Yeah, that's not a great situation. But maybe part of the way out of that is actually getting curious. Is there a more meaningful way to connect with women that would be hard to come by if I am in a narrow mindset that the whole game between men and women is transactional? Women are only looking for this very narrow subset of things, and if you don't meet that, they don't really care about you. Those women exist. I agree with you, but I certainly don't think that that is the whole gamut of women that exist. I know it's not. I know it's not. So the question is, how do you connect with people who are outside of that mindset, rather than staying comfortable in a mindset that says women are transactional, men can also therefore meet them there transactionally, men are kind of checking out from this. And by the way, if it's authentically true for you to go your own way, go your own way. Right? None of this is about me trying to tell you that you shouldn't be doing that. I'm just getting curious. It's almost like if you want to climb K2, climb K2. Ideally, you'd have the best education and information before you make that decision, right? So if you know that 1 in 4 people dies on K2, you want to factor that in, right? You want to be sober about that. So if you're laboring under some misapprehensions that women only want these 2 things, but actually there's a subset of women. Now, we don't know. I don't have all the sociological data, and it probably doesn't even exist accurately on this particular question. But let's say somewhere between 5, 10, 50, 75% of women actually, when push comes to the shove, they care about some other things, right? Maybe the thing that attracts them, maybe they notice tall men, right? Maybe in the same way that, lots of guys notice blondes, for instance. But whether if you look at men who are in relationships they want to stay in, whether they say the main thing is that she has blonde hair, I actually doubt it. And we also know that we're growing beyond types, right? Meaning you can have a sort of a physiologically arresting type, right? Maybe you're a sucker for brown hair or blue eyes or big butts or thin waist or whatever it is. But that's a different thing than actual compatibility in relationship, and when you're actually in a relationship, the value of that particular thing drops off pretty quickly, right? Just like, yeah, when you first buy a new car, that smell of it and the fact it's got no dings and all that, but that's not going to still keep you fulfilled after like month 1, 3, 6, 9, 12, 24, right? You're going to want something else. And so we're talking about what is that something else. Sometimes people can be transactional because they haven't had an opportunity for something else. Right. And by the way, there's plenty of evidence, right? I've worked and coached with women a lot. There's plenty of evidence that men are completely objective about women, right? Loads of men, and we all have that part within us. I think even perhaps as the most, quote, developed, conscious or whatever, inner work, being to your therapist, blah, blah, blah guy, you might still have that place that you can objectify women. But whether that's where you want to constellate a relationship, that's a different question. That's a different question. You might get seduced by an advert of a super yacht, but whether that's where you actually want to put all the resources that you have, that's a different question. And whether that would actually make you fulfilled versus just be like a fun weekend in Vegas, that's a different question. Vegas is a good example. You might go and have a ton of fun in Vegas, hypothetically, with women that you would never fully want to date or have a long-term relationship with. But that's also because you're getting to know them in a transactional environment. If you got to know that same woman in a very different environment, you might have a different view. Do you see what I'm so saying? It's like there's the context within which they're playing. There's the consciousness that you're bringing. There's the consciousness that they're bringing. you may not know Mary Wollstonecraft, right? Mary Wollstonecraft, I had to study Mary Wollstonecraft at Cambridge University when I studied political philosophy. Mary Wollstonecraft is one of the early pioneers of what we now call feminism, right? Women's rights. But she said something very interesting. She said that the evolution of society, right, the consciousness of culture is to do with the way that men and women relate and what they reward in each other, right? So they can reward this sort of traditionalism that says, well, a man does this and a woman does that, right? They can reward superficiality, or they can actually reward the best of what men and women bring to the table. And I think you have that same opportunity in front of you, right? You could reward your own objectification. You could reward your own transactionality. You could reward your own powerlessness and frustration. You could reward a view of women, the subset of women that bring a lot of superficiality to their dating. Or you could reward something else. You could reward something that's more nuanced, more gray, more complex, a bit more risky, more uncomfortable, but might actually give you a more expanded view of the world. And even if you're the only person taking a stand, even if it's true that the vast majority of the dating world is superficial and transactional, I don't happen to think that is fully true. I'm not sure that the apps are rewarding the right behaviors, incentivizing them. But let's just say for the moment that were true. You can still take a stand. You can still take a stand. That's hard. It's hard. I'm asking a lot of you there, but you can still take a stand that I don't want to just be superficial. And I don't want to have a lowly view of myself in dating and of women. And I don't want to make it just transactional. Yeah, if I'm not in a relationship, sure, there might be a space that I have a transactional connection with someone that might be largely about physicality. That's allowed. But if you're thinking about actual relationships, and we know that for a lot of people, this is one of the most fulfilling territories of life. I also think it happens to be one of the hardest, so the risk goes with the reward, right? That's the entrepreneur in me thinking. It doesn't help you, I think, to have that transactional view. So you just got to acknowledge if you're in it, it's hurting you as much as it's hurting gold digging women or superficial women, right? They're going to be there. It's the same thing as criminality, right? We all have a possibility that we could be criminal, right? So in the biggest perspective of criminality, everyone's a criminal, right? Even if it's just, you jaywalk, right? Or you sped that time, or you claimed a business expense, or you fill in the blanks, right? It's probably very few people who either wittingly or unwittingly haven't gone up against some edge of some law or some code, or, maybe you took your dog to the dog park and it should have been on leash and it was off leash, or maybe, you didn't get your rabies shots in time, or maybe your insurance lapsed. But then there's also the view that if we think of like more serious criminality, that's a subset of people. Now, if I only interact with that subset of people, I'm going to have a different view of humanity than if I never interact with that people. And you might say, well, yeah, it's a privilege not to interact with that people. Maybe you live in a neighborhood that has a high crime, right? Maybe that's true. But also in every high crime neighborhood, there's a lot of people that aren't engaged in crime that want a low crime neighborhood. Most people, it turns out, prefer to live in a low crime neighborhood, right? So you could say, well, the world has just gotten worse and it's all high crime. Or you could maybe figure out either I'm going to do something about it. I'm going to create some initiatives in my community, right? I'm going to do the hard slog of that. Or you might decide that's not the hill I want to die on. And I'm actually going to try and get out, and I'm going to move to a different community. Or I'm going to move to a different part of this community, or I'm going to install different measures at my house. You know what I mean? So there's all kinds of resourcefulness that you can bring that is different than getting hypnotized into a mindset that might actually be undermining you. That's my fear in some ways with the Men Go Your Own Way movement. If it's authentic, I'm all for it. And it might be even hard to discern what's authentic. But if it's true that the quote average guy is having a hard time competing in dating, is actually his going his own way making that any better? Is it actually helping? Are we trying to say as a society we want to level some of that playing field, right? You might say, well, it's just biology, right? It's just biology. You look at anything in the animal kingdom, right? There's female animals, and there's kind of like an alpha male, right? That's like the lion, leader of the pride, right? But there's lots of complex biological systems in the animal kingdom. B, animals are social, right? So there's complex social systems. And C, we are animals, but we also have consciousness that we evolve even whilst being animals. So if we only look at it at the level of the biology animal, we might get one view of reality. But that's not the only view of reality, because there's a whole set of things. You can't explain TikTok memes purely by just looking at the biology of a human, right? There's complex and emergent cultures and levels of development and consciousness and all sorts of things that emerge through time on top of our biology. Now, we don't want to discount that we have the biology, but if I only look at it, I get a very specific view of humanity, and I don't actually think that encompasses the fullness of our behavior, right? How would you explain over time the huge reduction in violence that human societies have experienced? Now, you might not feel that because you might turn on the news and say, well, look, it's just war, 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 war. But if you look back on the long trend, look at someone like Steven Pinker, right, the Better Angels of Our Nature, who looks at the metadata on the reduction of violence in societies through time, you're going to get a different picture. So sometimes you just have to change up your lens, right? Any worldview that is mostly built upon frustration or powerlessness is going to probably be partial. And so the question is, how can we take what's true about it? And what's true about it might be, this is legitimate frustration. You know, if you're I mean, even if I just talk about the dating experience that I alluded to earlier, right? If I'm in San Diego and I'm swiping, and I'm getting nothing back, yeah, that's a cruddy way to spend an evening, right? To spend like, you know, even half an hour, but you know, it's just addictive. You can easily spend hours swiping and you've got nothing to show for it. Yeah, that's frustrating, right? That's frustrating. But so the frustration's the partial truth, but normally frustration isn't the whole truth, right? Meaning there are other aspects to our experience. Most of us want to feel fulfilled, wholehearted, open. We want to commune and relate. We want to feel connected. We want intimacy. We want truth, beauty, right? Most people want these things. Now, you might say, well, they're not available to me. And that might be true in your experience. But that doesn't mean I think that you should give up on them. It might mean that we've got to move through some collective better ways of being, and you individually have to move through some better ways of being, thinking, perspectives in order to create more of the things that you actually want, right? Rather than maybe give up on them and get hypnotized by the frustration, right? I've always wanted to work for myself, and I, in some ways, have been lucky that I've had to do that. In some years, that's also been really limited, you know? And in some of those times, it might be easier for me to sort of give up on the dream of working for myself, you know, but that would in a way be responding just to the frustration. Now, in some years that might be right. You do it for a year or two, you go work for someone else, and then you come back and have another hustle. For some men, it might be right. Check out of the dating world. Don't be on the dating apps. Focus in on yourself. It might be right for you just to have casual connections that are largely about physicality for a little while. But that's probably not going to be your highest path of fulfillment and development. Now, if it is super fulfilling for you, you know, all the power to you, right? If you found a way of being in this world, even if it's countercultural, especially if it's countercultural, that's fulfilling to you, I'm just curious if it is. There's something just about the kind of overall energetic imprint of men go their own way that makes me feel like it's a little bit more on the frustration side, and I have sympathy for that, than it is on like the, you know, I'm super fulfilled about this. Do you know what I mean? If I've got a pain in my thumb and eventually I find a way to take away that pain, that's gonna feel good, right? But that's actually a different thing than having like really vibrant health, right? A lack of pain isn't the same thing as having fullness of expression. And there are types of expression that it's hard to have in purely transactional relationships, right? So one of the reasons to stay curious about relationship is I think there's a whole set of things that we can learn. Right? And this doesn't necessarily mean to be long-term relationships, in romantic connections that aren't just transactional. You might meet a woman who just shares something with you that forever changes you because it's true and you couldn't see it before. Or you might have a realm of experience. You might have a spiritual opening, right? Or you might just have an crazy romantic, adventurous time that's a once-in-a-lifetime thing. You know, so to not be open to those things, I actually would imagine is going to be to the detriment of most guys. Now, take a stand for having a relationship that works for you, right? So if all you've been getting is transactional gold digging, yeah, I don't want you to be in that relationship. I don't want you to be in the relationship where the woman just sees you as like an ATM and secretly just wishes that you made more money and that you were taller. No, I don't want that for you. So it's sort of like take the stand, say, have your no, but your no is different than your yes, right? So usually the thing that we're a no to is not the expression of the full thing that we'd be a yes to. right? You might be a no to eating crickets or insects. You don't want your insect protein, but that's different than you being a yes to an amazing steak, you know, or sweet potato fries, or, you know, whatever floats your boat. You get what I'm saying? So have your no, right? So I think the essence of the men go their own way is actually about their no. And I understand some of that, right? It's a no to the frustration, the powerlessness, the sort of sense that it's a rigged game, the no to the superficiality of women, no to gold digging, no to men not getting access to their children, no to divorce court decisions that seem to go in the favor of women over men. I think it's legitimate to have a no, or at least a strong inquiry around those things. But that is different than having a yes to intimacy, growing, owning your shadow, getting difficult feedback from women, right? If a number of women are saying it, it could just be that they're hypnotized into an untrue feminine perspective, or it could be there's a partial truth at least in it, and it might be more than partial. So if a number of women are saying you're emotionally unavailable, that might be worth just checking it out, because they could be right. And you could say, you know, women just want emotional availability in a way that's, you know, it's too much. It's too much, right? Now, maybe there are certain kinds of emotional availability that women could turn to their girlfriends more for. Maybe, you know, maybe in traditional culture that is the role of women, spending more time with women. But maybe there's something there for you. Don't be emotionally available just for women. Be it for yourself, right? Because actually being more emotionally available, knowing what you're feeling, processing what you're feeling, not discounting your own feelings, that's an edge of growth for most men. You may not want to make all your decisions from how you feel in the moment. That's something different. You may still want to have all your logical, objective, rational sobriety on board. But there are some things that your emotions are here to tell you. I don't care how scientific, post-scientific, objective, rational, high-powered, cerebral you are, right? You could be the smartest guy at Harvard, you know, tenured academic, all the peer-reviewed blah, blah, blahs. But your emotions are still going to teach you things that none of that will, right? Because your emotions are messengers that are specific to your life, right? Your emotions are here to give you messages, right? Give you messages about what you care about, what you don't care about, what's meaningful, what's not. It's a navigational system. You know, it's just like you can be the most rational person in the world. It doesn't necessarily tell you how you're going to feel when the sun is shining. You know, you can be the most rational, objective person in the world. It doesn't tell you what the taste of chocolate's like, right? So I think you get my point here. Your emotional availability, it might be that a woman cares about that more than you do, right? And that might just be one of the edges and contentiousnesses of male, female, or masculine, feminine dynamics in relating. There's some things that the masculine cares more about, and there's some things that the feminine cares more about. And some of those are an ongoing sort of tug of war that isn't ultimately resolvable, but it could be a creative tension, or it could be really gnarly and just doesn't work. You know, that's a difficult experience. So your emotional availability could actually be about you and you taking your emotions more seriously. If you've been in a bunch of situations, contexts where guys continually discount how they feel, and you've been part of that, you're missing something about your life. And I'm not saying get lost in your emotional reactivity, but I'm saying own up to your emotional authenticity. And if something is a feeling that you have over and again, maybe you need to unpack it. Maybe you need to get in there, get closer to it. That's the opportunity of emotional availability. And as it happens, a byproduct of that is you might be more attractive to women, and you might meet more women who care less about your height and income and care more about your emotional availability. You know, partly because, you know, one of the reasons, bluntly, like women care about height, right, is to do with physicality, protectiveness, and your ability to protect them, right? In most modern societies, the law does a pretty good job, right? We've still got further to go, but the law does a pretty good job of that, right? And the reason they want income is so you can provide for them, right? Many women don't need that. So I could say, oh, it's just ever increasingly about the height and the income. Or I could say, actually, you know what? They're less relevant than they've ever been. Less relevant than they've ever been. If a woman's saying, I don't even need you to, like, I don't want you to be a bum. I don't want you to never have a job or not know how to make income, but I don't need it. My economic survival doesn't depend upon whether you bring in money because I got a good job, right? Now, you might say, well, yeah, but the fact that she's got a good job means she's not going to date a guy that's got a lower income. And there are a proportion of women for whom that's true. You're right. So again, partial truth. But there's also part of this, which is women who have those incomes who could say, I don't actually care. I don't care if I make more money than you. Now, I may still want you to show up financially, right? Meaning I don't just want to see that, even though you make less money than me, you're racking up a whole ton of debt on frivolous expenses, right? Or why are you going to Vegas every weekend? Because you can't actually afford it. Or, if you've never thought about how might you be able to save some money or get a better job or buy a home or retire, right? There's lots of women that they want you to have some attention there, but it's not just about the raw, like who makes more money, right? You could be the guy that makes less money, but you could still be in charge financially or certainly bringing leadership and care and concern. That's actually what most women care about, right? If you want to take some of her money and make smarter investment decisions because you've thought harder about it, she might be really up for that, or if you want to say, actually, let's not spend money on that. Let's spend money on this because longer term, this will allow us to do X, Y, Z. She might really appreciate that. Do you know what I mean? So there's plenty of women also who, let's be honest, they make good incomes, but they spend good money, right? So if you're high earn, high spend, you might actually benefit from being with a guy who's not quite so high earn, but is low spend. And maybe there'll be some creative friction, but maybe that's actually a compliment. Do you see what I mean? So there's not just income. There's other things that go on. Money is also it's a proxy for resourcefulness. It's a proxy for opportunities, right? There's some guys who can open opportunities not just because of money, because they're resourceful, because they're creative, right? They figure out, actually, if we go this time of the year and on that time of the year, it's a third of the price, and I can actually now afford that, or I can't afford to go to a top-end hotel, but what I can afford is this really cool Airbnb that I found, or what I can afford is to go just for 2 nights, but if we do it this way, we can actually get there way quicker. Do you see what I mean? So resourcefulness and resources are not exactly the same thing, and resourcefulness is often the character trait that is attractive. And some women are happy for the guy that's going to, blossom more over the long term, right? They actually like the fact, like, I knew you and was attracted to you when you had $0 to your name. And now 10 years later, you have a business that's doing decently, but it wasn't because of that. If I'm only interested in you once you've made the money, it's probably the gold digger, right? Probably not the person you want to be in a relationship with. But if there's the woman who's like, yeah, actually, you've had 3 businesses and they're all a failure, but you've got this vision and I'm attracted to that, that's pretty cool. Do you know what I mean? So I'm going to wrap it here. I just want to say, distinguish your no from your yes. Let's be a no to the transactionality. Let's be a no to women being in a view of themselves where all they can have the luxury to care about is transactionality. Right? That's actually low self-worth. If I only see myself as a set of looks, or as how can I be sexually attractive to men, or how many men want to have sex with me, that's typically low self-worth, right? Part of that is my self-worth got bound up with my physicality and sexuality. Now, own your self-worth, own your sensuality, your sexuality, your physical appeal, own your desire to beautify and make the most of what you have. But if that's the core tenet of your self-worth, that's a difficult place for a woman, partly because everyone's going to age. So it's hard to maintain that stuff over time. And B, that's just such a narrow slice of reality. Like, wouldn't you want to also enjoy your skills, talents, depths, authenticity, emotional experience, growth, like all the aspects of womanhood, sensuality, intuition, love? Would you rather be the woman who's beautiful that doesn't love herself, or the woman that's objectively, by societal standards, less beautiful and loves herself? So there's no free lunch here, right? You get a chance to bring the consciousness that you want. You can even decide that you just won't play in the territory that is all about these very narrow metrics. Let other people play there, right? In a sense, we call that young soul. You might not have heard that expression, but young soul, right? It's all about the competitiveness. It's all about the game. It's all about ranking each other. It's all about ambition. And of course, there's sides of that are totally authentic. So I'm not knocking it. I'm just saying you might not even be a young soul. So you might not care about that stuff enough, but you've been trying to play a young soul's game. Maybe a little bit more of an old soul. Maybe you care a little bit more about some of the deeper, like, why are we even here? Like, we're on this planet spinning through place. Like, what's that about? Maybe for you, the right connection is someone that couldn't care less about some of the young soul antics, but wants a guy of substance, who's thought a bit about life, is introspective, has got some philosophy, has got a worldview, has got a stance. A lot of women love that. That's something you can cultivate. It doesn't matter what income you have. You can have a sexy worldview, right? The way that you look at things for a lot of women, right? Sapiosexuality, but it's not just about raw intelligence. It's also about how do you look at reality? What are you paying attention to? What are you tracking? What's meaningful to you? You know, it doesn't matter what income or height you are. You can be a heart-centered guy. Now, to a guy who's all in that transactional view, be like, what the hell are you saying right now? Heart? Like, women don't care about your heart. They care about how much money you make. They care about how tall you are. A lot of women care about heart, right? Because a lot of women want what? They want to feel loved. So they want a guy that's also capable of loving them, and not just loving them because they are a model or they are meeting societal standards of beauty or fill in the blanks. Actually, a guy that loves them for their essence, for who they are, more intrinsically. You can be that. You can be that no matter what income you have. That's automatically going to set you apart for other guys. If you're a high-income guy playing a young soul game who's only interested in the transactionality, you're going to get leapfrogged by a lower-income guy who's more emotionally available and who can actually see a woman, right? So your ability to see a woman will go a long way. It doesn't matter whether you're high income or low income, right? Now, are there subsets of women for whom that's not going to be true? Absolutely. The question is, what subset of women do you want to play with, right? Meaning, I can find anything. You know, I could go to the core of gangland and just say, you know, guys are only interested in hurting other men. And that might be true in that reality. Now, confusingly, also in that reality are going to be guys protecting other guys and protecting women, right? So none of these things is just one size fits all. But you see what I mean? I could go to the heart of something and just say, this is what it's like. But there are so many ways to express what it is to be a man and what it is to be a woman and how to connect. So find better places to play in, you know? If it's not working for you on the apps, go to the bar. If it's not working for you at the bar, go to the hotel lobby. If it's not working in the hotel lobby, go to a seminar. If it's not working at the seminars, go to a meditation class. If it's not working at a meditation class, go to a hiking group. If it's not working at a hiking group, do you get what I'm saying? So many places. Go to the dog park. You can connect, and there's all different ways of connecting, you know? I meet women who are, I sort of tongue in cheek, but there's some truth. Kind of feel sad that other people don't really connect with them because they don't have a dog, you know? So in some places, the dog is the currency of connection, you know? If you've got a dog, people are interested. If you don't have a dog, they don't even want to know your name. Now, that might sound crazy, but in that situation, if you really wanted to connect, you might just go like, you know, get a dog or go on Rover, become a dog walker for the week. You know, I mean, I'm just, be creative about the places that you can connect. And if the places you're currently connecting aren't working for you, and so your options are either A, find a new place, or B, somehow kind of disconnect from some of my authentic desires in order to fit in with the consciousness of this environment, I would want you to do the first thing. I'd want you to be truer to your true self and authentic desires by finding different and better places to play. And sometimes you have to create them. Sometimes you have to say, yo, this isn't working, so I'm going to host an event. I'm going to run a speed dating event, or I'm going to get a bunch of men or women together and have a dinner party, or have some beers in the back garden, or go on a hike, or fill in the blanks, but to create the thing that I want, because, you know, that leadership is needed. You know, sometimes the answers that are given to the problems, they're really there to highlight the problem. And my suspicion, and I might not be right about this, and I haven't spent a huge ton of time in this room, but my suspicion is that men go their own way in part. Why it's existing is to highlight the problem. To highlight the problem. For me, there's a similar thing with Trumpism. Its strength is that it highlights some problems. It highlights that globalization distributes its rewards differentially, and that some people are left behind and they're hurting. But just because you can highlight the problem doesn't always mean that you've got the solution. So whether men go their own way has the solution that en masse is right for men, I actually don't think so. And again, open to being educated. But it might be that it's doing a job of talking to a problem that most people are missing. And I want men's voices about their problems to be more in the public domain, about their real problems, where they're hurting, where they're vulnerable. You know, men committing suicide, men being lonely. These are real problems. They need to be addressed. But I suspect that some of the answers aren't yet in the solution set and getting talked about. And I want to be in that conversation with you. So I'm going to stop it there. Leave me a comment. What's your experience? Is this making sense? You're welcome to push back on me. Keep it constructive if you can. I'm coming to this with an open mind and open heart. I'm not attached to being right. Evidently, I'm not right about all these things. Evidently, there's nuance that I'm not seeing. So, you know, educate me. But let's try and do it within the context that we want to do it, which is actually about men and women doing something better for themselves and for each other. So I'm Jack. Thanks for being here.